Today at ShopDap.com we'll be installing an IS38 turbo on our 1.8T MQB engine. Okay, so today we're going to be doing an IS38 install on our Alltrack. This is the turbo that would have come on the Golf R or the Audi S3. This is a larger turbo. Our Alltrack actually comes factory with an IS12. There's the IS20, which is found on GTI models, which our vehicle already has been upgraded to, and then the IS38, which is the next level up. When you're upgrading any of these turbos on any MQB car, this DIY would apply to any basically GTI or 1.8T MQB car, as well as a Golf R and S3 as well. You will need software for tuning your car if you are upgrading the turbo. So in our circumstance with the IS12 to IS20, we had to put software to upgrade to that. And then again, we're gonna need new software to go to the IS38 turbo. So we have our software as well as obviously the hardware you have here, which is the install kit and then the turbo itself. You can find them at ShopDap.com, links in the description. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is remove these ignition coils, and we just break all these 10 millimeters loose for the grounds along them. And then we're gonna take the grounds off and then take out the 10 millimeter below it. All right, now to remove these connectors, best thing to do, you push back on this tab. So you can push down and you wanna push forward to help release it, and then you kind of push back on it. Now some of these, because this bridge is tied together, can oftentimes not want to come off without kind of going down the line. All right, and that's removed. Now I'm going to take off this intake hose. Because we have an aftermarket setup, yours might be a little bit different, and you may actually have to take out your entire airbox. We're just going to remove this hose for now because I think that will get us the clearance we need. Now we remove this hose to give us clearance. We're going to need to access some of these lines, and obviously this part of the turbo over here. Okay, so now I'm gonna take off this T30 over here, and then I'm gonna remove this line because we wanna take off this line that runs here and around. So we're gonna move this here to loosen it. I'll take it off the bottle, and then we're going to loosen it here as well as another T30, which should give us enough play in this line. We're gonna need to remove the hoses from it and then take it off. And so this screw is just another mounting point for this coolant line, and it loosens it up there. Okay, so we are going to remove our intake because there is one of the screws here for this coolant line that mounts it over here. With the stock airbox, you might be able to actually access this without removing the intake. I'm just not sure. So we're going to remove our racing line intake. So we're going to remove this last mounting screw for this line, and we are all loose minus the hoses that attach it. All right, so we're going to take our hose clamp pliers, remove this side, and we're going to take this one off. Now because this car is pretty new, you can kind of just take the clamp off, loosen it, and kind of work it down like so. This line, when last time we took this off, when we were doing the IS12, this line actually got quite a bit of coolant out when we popped it off. In this case it didn't. You may want to drain the coolant before you actually start with this install to avoid that. And that line is off there. And the last thing we have holding it on is going to be a hose with a flange here. It has a T30 on it. I'm going to try to pop that T30 off instead of loosening it. Now I'm going to take this diverter valve connector off. And really what I want to do here is we got to get this stuff loose, but we also want to get this wiring as much out of the way so we can see as much as possible. So we got to take that off. We're going to take off this clip here that holds it to this timing cover, and then we're going to take this connector off for this cam adjuster magnet. Well, you do want to drain the coolant out of this car. I'm going to drain, this isn't necessarily the lowest point, but it is the easiest point to drain from. If you remove the coolant temp sensor in this car, it's pretty easy to do. You can access it from the top. It's on this hose that mounts to the radiator here, and we're going to show you a shot from the top of what that looks like removing it. Okay, so here's our coolant temp sensor. We're going to pull this clip out, and then I'm just going to pull this temp sensor out. I'm going to leave the connector attached to it and everything. I'm just going to pop this out with a screwdriver and then pop this thing up. Make sure you got a bucket underneath there so you can catch as much of that coolant as possible. So we're going to remove this T30 that holds this hose in, and then pop this flange up. This is something that you could also take the hose off but I think you're gonna wanna have this out of the way anyway, so I'm gonna remove that there. And you should be able to just grab it and wiggle it. Careful because this is plastic, so you don't wanna go crazy because you can damage that. And then we're gonna remove this coolant line altogether. Okay, now we're gonna remove, this is the oxygen sensor wiring. I'm just gonna remove this and get it out of the way here, and you disconnect it over here on this end. You slide it out and then unplug it over here. And then we're gonna just feed this out. This you can either remove with the turbo or take off after the fact. I'm probably just gonna remove it before, but we gotta get this heat shield off first. Okay, so now we're gonna take off this V-band. Now this holds our downpipe on. This is a 6mm. I'm using a swivel just because the angle that this was put back on at makes it a little bit tougher to get at. This is an IE downpipe. We do have a DIY on MQB all-wheel drive one as well as front-wheel drive one. Once you're loose on this, you really just want to pop the screwdriver in to release this thing because it's really hanging on there and you're not going to get it loose otherwise. Like that. And then we got to get the other side. And we're all set there. And I'm going to take this bolt out all the way so that allows this thing out all the way like that. And then we can separate our downpipe, which we're gonna go underneath the car to separate the rest of it. Okay, so now we're gonna remove the mount for this. And now I'm gonna take these 213s out. Now, just to show you, we have a DIY on the entire downpipe install. This, I believe, will give us the clearance we need on our downpipe. If not, we're gonna have to remove this V-band clamp as well as maybe the tail section to get as much clearance as possible. Now, important note, if you can't get the clearance you need by removing this or loosening it up, you could always go with actually taking the downpipe out completely, which you do have to loosen the front end of the drive shaft and separate it from the transmission if you're going down that road. So it is something that's important to know if you are trying to go down that road. But removing your downpipe will give you a lot more space to work with from the bottom up into the return lines and feed lines for the coolant and oil to the turbo, as well as just removing general turbo related items as a whole. This is especially on all-wheel drive cars. On front-wheel drive cars, it's less of an issue. All-wheel drive, it's much worse. Okay, so what we're looking at here is, this is where the downpipe mounts. We have it removed, but just for context to show you what you're looking at, is gonna be a 13mm on this stud right here, and on the other side of the bracket over here, there's another one right over here. And so you're gonna remove those 13s, and it allows you to slide this out of the way. You also can loosen this nut right here. This will allow this thing to spin around and move for you to give you adjustability if you have any issues. Okay, so we're gonna remove this heat shield here. Start with these 10mm back here. And then we have 5mm Allens both here. Now these are going to be right next to this hole. We actually just threw one of the plugs from the turbo in that hole just to block it off, to prevent anything from getting dropped down there. It's probably a good idea to do so. The other two mounting screws are on the back side over here, so let's take a look back there. Okay, so this is one of the 5mm that you're gonna be removing here. And the other one, we cracked that one loose. The other one is located right here. And we're gonna crack these two loose and then remove them, and we should be able to clear our cover. All right, now we got that last one out. We can pull that up and out of the way. I'm gonna remove this hose for our catch can. This is not a factory one. If you want to take a look at how you remove the factory one, it's pretty much just yank that thing and you got to work it out. And this one is more like a secondary air system that has kind of teeth on it that catch. This is going to be much better than the original one. This is the one with the end on from Racing Line from their catch can. Now we're going to take these coils out. Now I'm using this special tool that we sell on our site. It is not required. We will have links to it where you can find it. Really, it just makes it easier to pull these coils out because there's not a lot to grab onto. So you thread it in, spread that thing out, and then it gives you the ability to pull up like that. We are going to need to take these off to clear, for the turbo to clear this valve cover. Some of these cars do have, these things are stuck in there pretty good, and the lower portion of the coil will separate from the upper portion. It will stretch. If you look at the DIY we shot on the coils a long time ago, you can see how hard they were to actually remove. All right, now we're gonna take off the turbo inlet pipe here, And we can just rotate this, and then you can just wiggle it out. I take this boost pipe off here. It really just disconnecting the hose from the turbo outlet here from this clamp. There's just a screw clamp on there, and we're using a 7mm socket. Most screw clamps on Volkswagen Audis use a 7mm socket. I'm gonna loosen this clamp up. This is really just so that this boost pipe is a little bit looser now, and we can pop it off from the turbo itself and clear it. Take off this clamp on this hose here, or this pipe, and this should free us up. I'm also gonna take this T30 off here just to free that thing up and give us what we need. There's another one over here. Should give us all the play we need when working with that one. So that's on there pretty good. So what I'm going to do is just get a pick under there, work it around, and then pop it off. This will allow you to make this thing come off a heck of a lot easier whenever you do that. Pick or a small screwdriver will also work as well. Picks are usually better just because they're able to get in there, because they tend to be smaller than most screwdrivers. You do have to be careful when you're doing this that you don't puncture the hose. And so our upper part of our turbo is basically free. We will need to disconnect the wastegate, which is over here. Okay, so this is the connector for the wastegate we're gonna be removing. We're just gonna take that off so we don't have any wires hung up later. Okay, so now we're gonna crack this oxygen sensor loose. This requires a special socket. They're either called an oxygen sensor socket, or in our case, we also sell suspension sockets that are capable of doing this type of thing as well, which we will link to as well. So you can check out that if you don't have an O2 sensor socket. We can get this line out as well, and we should be able to just work that one out like that. And then there's a mounting bracket with a triple square right here. This is an 8mm triple square. You are gonna need that. It's a special tool, and if you don't have it, we have sets available, but you will need a triple square and 8, and there's gonna be some other ones involved with this as well. Okay, so here's where things start to get a little bit more touch and go depending on your skill set. So we have now this one, there's a line that goes into this part of the turbo that we need to remove, and we also have one underneath here that we have to remove. Now both of these, you're gonna have to, if you're pulling this out from the top, well, you're gonna have to pull it out from the top, but if you're moving everything from the top, which on an all-wheel drive car is almost required because you don't have clearance without taking the drive shaft and downpipe out, you are going to need to remove them blind, and you're either going to need to use a mirror or something so that you can actually see what you're working with. So in this case, we're actually going to try to get a GoPro in there to give you a shot of what we're actually doing, but these are what you're working with. Is this hole right here, and then this one down here. The other ones, we've removed them. Now you can also take this stuff off from the block. I will say this, we had an S3 in here recently. Early model cars used a metal line that comes from one of these that goes into the block. It is almost impossible to take out. Our tech spent a very long time trying to move it. They can be difficult. The newer ones have a plastic fitting, probably because that metal one gets stuck in there. So in this case, we're gonna be removing these from the top and blind so that we can just pull this thing out straight from there, which we're gonna do now. Okay, here we are on our engine stand. Just want to show you this because it's going to be hard to see in the vehicle because this is up against the firewall, but this is the coolant line we're going to be looking at. There's a triple square up here and the torque screw here. This is just a mounting screw, and this actually holds it to the turbo. So you're going to remove these two, and then this is going to pop out this direction towards the back of the vehicle. And you are going to want to get something pretty short on there. We cracked it loose, and I'm going to thread that out. Okay, so this has a mounting screw on it. It uses a T30 Torx. The problem with that is that there's very little clearance back there. So what I used is this socket, and then it has a hex bit driver on the end of it. And then I took it like this, got it in there, and then cracked it loose like that. But now I have cracked it loose, so I'm gonna thread it out by hand. Okay, so now with this line that I've removed, the best thing to do that I've seen is you can kind of get a flathead screwdriver in there, make sure you have all of the mountings off, and then you can kind of pry against the housing of the turbo right beneath it, because it is metal, and then just pop it out from the turbo and release that. So we now have that one free, and then you can reach around to feel the other side of the turbo. Okay, so now we're going to remove the lower mounting. That is an 8mm triple square, much like the other one. This particular length seems to work out all right, and so what I have to do is feed this down from the bottom, and you're gonna see on this GoPro here, we're gonna cut to this footage so you can see what I'm working with. And I'm feeding underneath the turbo, behind this wastegate rod, and in between
What are you doing?
this mounting. And so what I can do is get it in there like this. And now I'm gonna break this loose. And she's out. Holy shit. For the kids at home, that one's not an easy one. Okay, now we're looking at a 7mm that mounts the turbo to the mounting bracket on here, and we're just gonna crack this thing loose. Now we got the 7mm out. The last thing I believe we need to do is remove these 4 nuts that hold it on. So we're gonna do that and get this thing loosened up. Okay, so here are these 12mm nuts that hold this turbo on. Now this should need to be turned in the right direction so that we can loosen it. Okay, so here we're gonna crack these 12mm nut loose. This is the bottom ones we're gonna start with first, just because they're toughest to access, and this thing's gonna start to loosen up on you. So I'm gonna take this one, and I got a ratcheting wrench here. Okay, so the lower coolant hose on this is extremely difficult to remove, so what I'm going to attempt to do, it goes to this heater core coupler right here. I am going to pop this clip off and see if I can get this thing off the, this quick connect off the heater core. These things oftentimes do not cooperate and are very tough to get off. If that is the case, we may abandon this, but this may be the easiest way for us to deal with this. Being a fairly new car, this may come off fairly easy, but oftentimes these things are not very easy, and you can potentially break them if you're not careful, which you do not want to break a heater core hose. It actually did free up a lot of space for me, but I did not need to take that off, I don't think. Okay, so now we should be clear to remove this. We do have some hoses in the back that might hang us up a little. And we got to clear a few lines here. So we do have a few things in the way. There we go. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, there we go. And she's out. Piece of cake. We're going to be installing our new seals on these things, but you will want to clean them up to make sure. So you can see kind of ours are kind of corroded, either rust dirty kind of looking here. So get a wire brush, clean it up, and then we're gonna get our new seal installed, and then we'll install our turbo once we're done cleaning these up. So you want to make sure you clean these things up just to make them go in easier, and then get your new seals on. Okay, last thing we're going to be doing before we swap this turbo into the car is this one has the turbo muffler, has a lot of turbulence. This is a pass-through to prevent turbulence, and we're going to slide this guy in from racing line. So first, we replaced our gaskets on all of our lines here that we had open. Our kit does include them for all the sides of the line, so no matter which way you're replacing them, you have the option. Obviously, we didn't use all of them based on our kit because we didn't take the lines off in every section. So our gaskets are on. I've got the exhaust gasket on. We're ready to drop this thing back in. What I would recommend is something you might want to consider would be taking the bracket, for the support bracket for the turbo off or loosening it. It is something that can be a pain point or a hang up point during this. So if you remove that, it would free up a lot of that stuff. We have our bracket here, the support bracket. I loosened this 13 at the bottom because I had a tough time getting this threaded in up top. So loosen that bottom, it'll allow you to move this thing around and get this 7mm threaded in up top. Here's the top of our mounting bracket again on the turbo where that 7 is, and then your 13 down here, which you break this loose. It's just like a pinch bolt, so all you do is break it loose and unthread it a little bit, and then it can pull out of the ear on the block here. So you don't need to take this out all the way to remove it. So you can take this 7 out and then thread this thing out and pull the bracket out of place. That is what you need to do to get this lower brace once you get the turbo mounted on here. We also popped in our line below, and what I did was got it set in place, and then I went underneath with a pry bar, stuck it on there, either pry bar or a long screwdriver, and I tapped it with a hammer kind of, and make sure you get it in place to get it seated all the way, because sometimes it'll have a hard time seating underneath there.
We forgot to mention, before you start up your vehicle, you will want to make sure before you install your turbo feed line, which is on top of the turbo, and make sure you have the turbo return line already installed, is to fill up this hole with oil before you're actually proceeding with the install. You will want to make sure that the turbo is oiled to the best of its ability before you actually start the vehicle to ensure the longevity of the turbo.
I did install the bracket for the turbo. That was something that we actually had to remove because I forgot to plug in the wastegate. Now, one thing that's really important to note, and Max had to help me, it's kind of a two-man deal, was I forgot to plug in the wastegate actuator on the IS38. The IS38 has a different allocation for the connector. So actually it plugs in like this, and so the back of the wires butt against the block. And so once this is bolted on, it doesn't allow you to plug it in very easily. So I had to loosen these bolts, pull the turbo forward with that bracket, this bracket for the turbo out of place, and actually pull it forward so that he could plug it in, and then we set it back in place. So that's super important when you're installing one of these. You have to do the adaptation procedure, which we're going to show you. We'll link to the video that shows the adaptation procedure for when you're installing an IS38 to make sure your wastegate adaptation is correct. But you will want to make sure it's plugged in and do it before you install everything, just in case you need to make any adjustments for adapting your wastegate in any way.
We've got videos showing how you can install the software yourself at home using UniConnect Plus cable. So we're not going to show you this whole process, but you can check those out. We'll link that if you want to see how to do this yourself.
Okay, so I am buttoning up out here. Max is actually working on software in the car. So he's getting our Unitronic IS38 tune that is currently in beta. So if you are a Unitronic user, you wouldn't see it live yet. It is still in beta. We are going to be testing, and we should be able to move forward with this. There are no really other notes about major things you want to deal with. Everything goes in the reverse order that you went with, and all the notes were really around all the bracketry, all the lines, and all that stuff, getting that in place. That stuff can be a little bit challenging and potentially can create some issues along the way, are the biggest concerns that you're going to run into. Okay, so now we're going to burp the cooling system. Once you burp the cooling system to run it, usually what you do is run it with the cap off until the fans kick on. That will allow the air out of the system. If you do drive it after the fact and you do have overheating issues, you likely have an air bubble somewhere in your system, in which case you would have to work on getting that air out. And now we can test drive our vehicle to verify our IS38 install is all good, and we're all set. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it. And for parts for your Mark 7, shopdat.com.